thought he was a populist. And suddenly you have someone who's not a populist, who's one of these elites who failed, responsible for Donald Trump. That seems peculiar. It also seems frightfully unfair to blame the losers of 2016, Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio. They may have not been the most competent politicians, but they offered an optimistic message of growth, of an American century, of a confident America in the world. And to blame them for Donald Trump seems awfully churlish. When I think of the causes of Donald Trump, and we'll have plenty of time to discuss this later on, in addition to the voters themselves, I think, how is it that so many people got these wrong ideas about the economy? I don't mean politically incorrect ideas, I mean wrong, factually wrong. Where could they have heard this? Where could they have gotten the notion that America doesn't win anymore? Where could they have gotten the notion that immigrants are to blame? Where could they have gotten the notion that trade steals our jobs? Those were the folks that Bret Stephens mentioned. This is, and there really is one, a vast right-wing conspiracy. This is the toxic brew of right-wing media, right-wing politicians, charlatans out to make a buck. And for years, they have dumped this drivel into the laps of voters who, as Bret says, it'd be nice to blame immigrants. It'd be nice to blame foreigners. But where do they get these wrong-headed ideas? It's the Seans, the Rushes, and many others who have told you a story not unlike the ones our opponents did, which has no bearing in reality. Now, if Donald Trump were really the result of an economic down boom or economic collapse, you'd think that they'd be poor, right? You know what the average salary, the average income of a Trump voter is? $72,000. These are not people down on their luck. These are people looking to blame others. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer Rubin. And that concludes round one of this Intelligence Squared U.S. debate, where our motion is blame the elites for the Trump phenomenon. Okay, please remember again how you voted at the beginning of the debate. I want to remind you that after you've heard all of the arguments, we're going to have you vote a second time, and reminding you that it's the difference between the first and the second vote that will determine our winner, which team's numbers go up the most in percentage point terms. Now we move on to round two, and in round two, the debaters address one another directly, and they take questions from me and from you in our live audience. Our motion is blame the elites for the Trump phenomenon. We have heard the team arguing for the motion, Ben Domenech and Tim Carney, argue that what we are seeing in Trump's success as a candidate is ordinary people reasserting themselves against a list of leaders who have produced only failure in their lives and failures for their country. They described a system of cronyism and self-serving among a long list of people. They identified the elites specifically in their argument as the men and women who have been in charge over the last 10 to 20 years in the major institutions in the United States, political and otherwise. They make the argument that the distrust that the elites have experienced is earned due to the failure of institutions run by those elites. The team arguing against the motion, Bret Stevenson and Jennifer Rubin, well, they did a bold thing by pointing out that the Intelligence Squared audience itself is comprised largely of elites, causing consternation among many who were not sure whether to take that as a compliment or an insult. But they argue more broadly that the notion that the elites need to be blamed for a decision that people are making in full responsibility is condescending to the Trump voters themselves. They believe that there is a fake victimization card being played by Trump and exploited by Trump. They talk about, in fact, the country being far better off than their opponents depict it. They reject this notion of a dystopian United States. And they believe that conservatives do not argue that immigration causes unemployment. They say that the decline in America that Trump blames on elites is a fiction. I want to go to the team that's arguing against the motion, Jennifer Rubin and Ben Domenech, and see if I can ask you to resolve something that is confusing me a little bit about your argument. On the one hand, you are saying that Trump supporters have been fed a line of misrepresentation of the state of things in America through, for example, you named the Shawns and the Rushes, telling a pretty negative story and making people feel bad about themselves so that Trump can swoop in and make them feel better. At the same time, you're saying it's condescending to voters, to those voters, to say that they don't know what they're doing, that they're responsible for their votes. And I'm not sure if those two things go together. So I wanted to see, maybe start with Brett, if you could take that on.
Do you want to start?
Sure.
Okay, Jennifer Rubin.
Thank you. It's not internally inconsistent at all. Voters are ultimately responsible for what they do with this information. They're ultimately responsible for educating themselves. They're ultimately responsible for picking up a real newspaper or listening to some real news to inform themselves. They cannot hide behind the Shawns and the Rushes. That, however, does not minimize the damage that the Shawns and the Rushes and the blogs and the rest have done. They have poisoned the body politic. They have made, as we have seen in history so many times, the outsider, the other, the source of these people's hardship. It's not unusual, I think, that media and social media should be such a fixation with Donald Trump. What's his favorite medium? Twitter. There, the so-called alt-right, the right-wing, and the white nationalists congregate, and there his message is spread in all of social media's glory. And what is it? It's not a message of economic revival or renewal. It's a message of anti-Semitism, of racism, of misogyny. So
Okay.
yes, I do hold the voters responsible,
All right.
but they've had some help along the way.
I want to let Ben Domenech respond to
So
the other side.
I have to welcome Jennifer for agreeing with us. I mean, if you don't think that Sean Hannity, who was flying Newt Gingrich around in his personal jet to try to get him to be Donald Trump's vice president, is an elitist, I don't know what you're thinking. I mean,
He doesn't think
he is
he's
the
elitist.
definition of a media elite.
He doesn't think he is.
Wait,
Well,
but
that's
you had
up
a
to
long
him.
run.
What Sean Hannity thinks about himself is his business. But, I mean, just definitively, you're talking about multimillionaire media elites with gigantic megaphones who've been saying things for a long time. Whether you agree with the level of responsibility they have or not, when you say that they were responsible for this, you're saying an elite person was responsible.
No, you're not listening. What I said was that the voters are ultimately responsible. And Sean Hannity doesn't think he's an elitist. He's the champion of the anti-elitists. And by the way, he's a college dropout. So it's not as if these are sophisticated people.
Okay,
Part
Tim-
of the problem is that an elitist is everyone
Tim
and
Carney.
anyone. Why don't we take
Jennifer,
these people for
Jennifer, let me let Tim
granted?
come in. Please, Tim, jump on in.
Yeah, so I would just add that Jennifer's phrase, shuffling of the workforce, that would be quite a phrase to bring to the places I went out on the campaign
Perhaps
trail.
creative destruction would be-
Jennifer,
West Allen.
hang on. I just want to set a little bit of a ground rule. I'm okay with the occasional spontaneous break-in, but I need you to let him get his argument out, and then we can return to your side. Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
Come out to West Allis, Wisconsin, outside of Milwaukee. C.J. LaRock suffering. He's a Gulf War. He's had a quadruple bypass duty. He's surgery. He's unable to find a job. Gary LeMay, who was out there two tours in the Persian Gulf, disabled, can't find a job. Was promised by his congressman Paul Ryan that he was going to get help. Didn't get it. Jeff Mason, the factory worker, the son of a factory worker, who's now driving a truck and for half the wages of that, and you tell them that they're simply shuffling of the workforce. Yes, the markets have winners and losers when they do it. The Republican leadership explicitly promised that they were going to fight for these people, and they repeatedly delivered not just free trade, but subsidized trade, not just open borders, but again, bringing in guest workers, importing, not allowing low-skilled workers to come over, but importing workers who are totally unfree to leave their jobs because that's an immediate deportation. This was rigging of the game. This was
Okay.
not free enterprise.
Brett Stevens.
Are there black people in the working class? Are there Hispanics? Are there Catholics? I think so. Are they suffering from the shuffling of the workforce or creative destruction? Probably. Why aren't they responding to Trump's message? They're making a very Marxist argument, which is amusing coming from someone from the American Enterprise Institute, which is that this is all about class. This is about how the elite class, and by the way, Sean Hannity and I disagree about everything, but the one thing we do agree about is he is not a member of the elite, okay? However much money he may have, all right? It's back to the point. So all of these people who are making in the, I don't know, third, fourth quintile of income, they're affected by the same forces. And yet they see Trump for who he is. And they're refusing to respond to his message. Who is responding to the message? And why? It's not because of class. It's not because of globalization. It's not because of the threat of immigrant workers. It's because of an appeal to demagogic, race-baiting, and immigrant bashing.
All right, let's let Ben Domenech respond.
So I want to make 2 points about this. The first is one of the most telltale signs of whether you were going to be a Trump voter or not was actually not your own economic success. It was your proximity to economic anxiety. There have been multiple looks at this. We have a great deal of data on this. NBC News did a fantastic report by Benji Sarlin. I encourage you to look it up, that looked at Trump's America. And what they found was the people who were most actively in favor of Donald Trump was not the person suffering from the opioid crisis. It's the person who knows that person. It's their father, it's their mom, it's the person who thinks that we need dramatic change in this country. And that, to me, is a telltale sign of why this rejection is one of the elites. It is a rejection of the people who've been in charge. They want a dramatic change agent. That change agent is not a good vehicle for the change that they actually want to achieve, in my view. But it is an element of change, an instant where they feel that they have to do something dramatically different in order to get something different from our government. If that isn't a rejection of the political elite, I don't know what is.
Let me put a question again to the side arguing against the motion. All right, so you're making the claim that certain people, Sean Hannity, Rush Limbaugh, are such a small cadre that they don't represent a broad elite, okay? And your opponents disagree with that. But I want to move on to another part of their argument, which is there's a larger systemic cronyism involved in Washington. They describe Washington as a favor factory. I'm doubting you're going to dispute that. And part of their argument is that the have-nots look at the haves and think not only do they have stuff, but they have stuff because they're cheating and the game is rigged. That the elites are, as your opponent said, living in an economic bubble of protection. They get to drink the white wine and go to Europe, as you just pointed out.
There's a lot of cronyism.
So
There's been cronyism since the dawn of time.
And the last, I'll just nail it, the last part of their point is that the resentment that has arisen from that has led to a breakdown in trust, which has enabled Trump.
No, I mean, look, there's been cronyism since some kind of deal was struck to put Washington, D.C. in the swamp that it's in, and ever since. This is not a new phenomenon. People have been mad about cronyism for a long time, and various politicians of all kinds of stripes, Jimmy Carter would be an example of one, Ronald Reagan might be an example of a Republican, have tried to do something about it. It's in part of our system. That's not what's new here, okay? You can go back to the 1970s to look at books written against crony capitalism and so on. The Wall Street Journal was writing those editorials at the time. What's new is the appearance of a demagogue on the scene who has been fueled by social media and his little helpers in the non-elite media to spread a message appealing to the basest instincts. Let me tell you something. Why did Donald
Actually, I want to stop you there because you've had the floor for a while. Let Tim Carney respond and you can come back. Tim Carney.
So rather than try to follow Brett on his navigation of which Fox News hosts are elite and which Fox News hosts aren't elite, because if you've seen Brett Baer and the way he dresses, I think he counts as elite, but I'm not sure about Hannity, because he wears jeans under the table on the air. But the cronyism, The cronyism, A, is reaching new heights. I mean, again, you look at this. You look at the bailouts of Wall Street. You look at Obamacare, where you had, again, these Republican leaders, the people who were put in power, Bob Dole and Bill Frist and Billy Tozan, all enriching themselves off of this corrupt law that then takes away choice from consumers. What's new is that when the government power reaches these heights, and the Republicans ran against it, and then they showed that they said this is a cesspool. And then they got there and it felt more like a hot tub to them and they stayed. And that's what's new is the Republican voters, the populist voters saw that they were consistently being lied to by everybody inside the Beltway. So they turned to the guy who at least admits he's a crony capitalist and says he alone can fix it because he knows how the game is played. So it was the guys who rigged the game who set the stage for Donald Trump.
Jennifer Rubin.
Cronyism is a problem, but Donald Trump rarely talks about it, except to boast of his own efforts at cronyism. What does he talk about 90% of the time? Immigrants, trade. It is, as Brett says, about something much more sinister than economics and cronyism. And our opponents still haven't answered the question. Why is it that African Americans aren't upset about cronyism? Don't they count? Virtually none of them are supporting Donald Trump. What about Hispanics? He's doing worse than Mitt Romney, which is not easy. Don't they care about cronyism? What about women? Women overwhelmingly don't like Donald Trump.
But Jennifer, in that case, doesn't the race baiting and the sexism negate the appeal that Trump would have to those populations you're talking about?
Of course he does, but they're arguing that the Trump phenomenon arose because of this populist uprising, because of this disgust with Washington. Well, Catholics are just as disgusted with Washington, and they're not responsible for Donald Trump. Hispanics are just as upset about cronyism as Donald Trump, and they're running in the other direction in droves, and women as well. They're trying every which way they can, but to hold Donald Trump responsible for what he is: a racist, a bigot, a misogynist. And he has touched on something that many of us are horrified to see. But the longer we ignore it, and the more we make excuses for it, the more we let him and the people who support him off the hook.
Ben Domenech.
The problem with Jennifer's argument is that she's basically agreeing with Hillary Clinton about the basket of deplorables and all that stuff, which from my perspective is really unfair to Trump's voters because, frankly, I mean, if you're saying that the reason that he's had success is racism and misogyny, I think you're ignoring the fact that for years, polls have told Republicans in Washington that a significant portion of the country, 35% according to one survey, believed that it was important to enforce our immigration laws and to deport people who were here illegally. There are a lot of people who shared that opinion, but the elite consensus in Washington, a bipartisan consensus, was that you're not allowed to want that thing. And that was being told to the base of the Republican Party for years. It's not racist to want to actually enforce our immigration laws. That's something that's an opinion held by a lot of people who are not racist or misogynist and voted for Donald Trump not because they thought that he was going to say racist things and misogynist things and that they enjoyed that, but because they thought that he would stand up to the existing elite consensus in Washington and turn it on its head.
And to point out that racism and misogyny that Donald Trump peddles appeals to racists and misogynists is simply deflecting. Yes, Donald Trump bears blame for the Donald Trump phenomenon, but the fact is the elites have helped set up a system in which that kind of stuff has purchased. It's like when liberals said that greed was responsible for the Wall Street collapse in 2008, that's like saying gravity is responsible for an airplane crash. Racism and misogyny are always there. Why is it happening now? It's because the elites have failed and a lot of the working class, a lot of the out of power, the people who don't live in those 5 of the 6 richest counties within the Beltway, they feel the game is rigged against them, and the demagogue now is able to grab them because the elites failed them.
Brad Stevens, are you saying...
Can I just...
Yeah, please respond. Go ahead, Brad Stevens.
This very point, because it's important. So you guys are to blame for the racism and misogyny. Just let's not forget, you're the elite. You're to blame. You know, for a long time, I think most of us in this room kept thinking, well, one day Donald Trump is going to say something that's so bad that the bubble will burst, right? And at first it was the McCain comment, then it was the Megyn Kelly comment, then maybe the Mussolini comment, then maybe that horrendous comment about Judge Curiel, Gonzalo Curiel, then Mexicans as rapists. No, that was before. Anyway, a whole succession of things. And everyone was saying, at one point he's going to say something, it's going to end it. And it never happened. And I kept wondering, why does this not happen? And I thought, you know why? I'll tell you why. Because this is like a strip club. And every time he says something dirty, it turns out people want more of it. And so what he was doing, they're like, take it off, take more off, take more off. He was appealing to the pornographic instinct of a part of the American population. What was happening was a species of political pornography. Now, Mrs. Clinton just said this terrible thing, the basket of deplorables, and we're all saying, oh, it was bad politics. But you know what? Wasn't untrue. It wasn't untrue. Okay, YouGov, which is a polling agency, does a poll. There was a story in The Economist about this, which, you know, last I checked was not a terrible source of media. Looks like 58% of the respondents who said they backed Mr. Trump resided in the poll's highest quartile for combined racial resentment scores. And we all know that this is about right.
All right, let's let your opponents respond. I just want to let you know you have a twofer coming because they appropriated 2 in a row. Okay. So you have that to hold in reserve. Who would like to respond to what your opponents are saying?
I disagree with Brett Stevens and with Hillary Clinton that a quarter of the population is unredeemable. And my bias on the table is I'm a Christian and I think everyone is redeemable, and that I think it is at the heart of the opposition's argument to paint a huge portion of the country and not a small portion. I deal with these people on Twitter as badly as you do, Jen. I mean, some of these Trump people on Twitter are literally the worst people in the world, and I agree. They're deplorable. I think they're redeemable. But that Hillary was right that 24% of the country is deplorable and irredeemable. That really is one of the arguments they have to make. And to do it, they have to say that there is no working class. There is no legitimate working class grievance. And that's an easy thing to say when you're in this auditorium, when everybody's been to Europe in the last 5 years. I don't know what that wine is, Brett, but if any of you have it, I'd like to taste it.
And Tim Carney, what do you make of your opponent's use of the notion that the victimization is fake? So it's mocked up.
So the fact is, I agree. The way I've put it is that there has long been sort of a subsidy propping up low-skilled white guys. And to some extent that disappeared, that we had restrictions on trade, restrictions on immigration, and low-skilled white guys had higher wages than they long did. And so you could say things are becoming more fair, I agree. But the fact is that the white working class has seen their wages fall while Hispanics, while women, while black women, not black men, but every other group has seen their wages go up since 1999. So these people who didn't rig the game in their favor, the working class whites did not rig the game in their favor in the 1990s. It became unrigged, and now they see things going against them. And the fact is the Republicans told them, if the Republicans hadn't overpromised, the Republican elites overpromised, they said, we're going to repeal your Obamacare, we're going to restore your wages, that they constantly made those promises and never delivered. So the victimization, some of it's real, some of it's fake, but the fact is the Republican elites were the ones getting up the hopes.
Okay, Jennifer Rubin.
Well, we were talking about deplorable, not irredeemable. And we Jews just believe in good and evil. We don't think everyone is redeemable. Be that as it may.
Including David Duke.
Yeah. Be that as it may, there is something disturbing. In one poll we saw earlier in the year, 59% of Trump voters believe President Obama was born in Kenya. That, I'm sorry, you can call it whatever you want, but you're not responsible for it, and that is racism. And there have always been in history, whether it was the Jews, whether it was the blacks, whether it was the immigrants, whether it was the communists, whether it was the gays, there's a long list of culprits that are dragged out to explain why people aren't responsible for their own lives.
Bret Stephens, let me ask you this, and this will be part of your twofer, I guess. On the whole, do you feel the elites are doing a pretty good job?
As Israeli friends of mine like to say, it's depend. I bet everyone in this room is doing a pretty good job at whatever it is they're doing. Doctors, educators, lawyers, whatever. That's part of the elite.
So,
is the
okay.
Washington elite doing a pretty good job? No, the Washington elite is not doing such a pretty good job. Okay? I don't think that's particularly controversial. Okay? But the real question is, then, are they doing such a horrendous job that they've created this utter dystopia where we walk out into a kind of war zone that we hardly recognize? You know, you watch certain cable news shows that I won't mention here, and you would think that this country is utterly falling apart. How parochial is this? Go someplace, people, and look at the way the world is and feel blessed with all of our problems here in America to be in the United States today.
I want to let Dom Benemich have the microphone to reply, and after that I will start wanting to go to audience questions, so please get your questions ready. Remember, I'll call on you. Please wait for the microphone and stand up. Tell us who you are, especially if you're writing or sharing the story publicly. Let us know who you're with. And Ben Domenech.
The issue here, I think, really is a lack of appreciation for the level of dramatic change that the American people want to see. When I started out, I talked about the number of people who have a significant amount of faith in various institutions, and I mentioned Congress. Congress actually has 0% in that, okay, 0. The level of dramatic change people want to see, I think, is a lot bigger than just the people that Bret is talking about. Fox News just had its best quarter that it's ever had, but the average viewership on each day was 1.3 million people. You would have to have a situation where all of those people were going out and getting 9 of their friends to vote for Donald Trump to get the totals that he got. I just think that this is a lot more about the dramatic change that people want to see within this country, feeling that the system is rigged against them, feeling that dramatic change is necessary, and looking to this man as a vehicle for that change. I don't think it's simply a number of Americans who want to see more racism and misogyny in our public square as if it's a strip club.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to some audience questions now. Would you mind telling us your name?
Yes, my name is David Braunschweig. I hate to address the question to neither side, but to you, sir. I'm surprised that this question has morphed into another question, which is, which of the two sides is most stridently anti-Trump? Because right now, I have the impression that one is.
Well, I take that as their right to be anti-Trump. Sir.
My name is Vibhuti Jha. I'm very delighted that I came from Long Island to attend the first ever debate here because I frequently participate in the Indian television channels. Bret Stephens, I'm delighted to meet you today because I read your articles in Wall Street Journal.
Sorry, you can chat with him afterwards. Yeah.
The question here is the elites have failed. Because coming from India as I do, and if I didn't tell you I was a Hindu, then you would think I was a Muslim. But my impression is that America is going down the wrong path. Everything that made America great is not happening anymore.
Sir, I need you to get to your question, please.
The question is, are you drifting to a society of freebies, or people are going to work and
I'm going to pass on
living?
that question
Thank
because
you.
it doesn't help us get to a new place on the motion itself. So with respect, I'm going to pass on it. But you are also welcome to chat. Everybody is, by the way. You can rush the stage afterwards. Right down front here.
Could you please define for me who you think the elite are? You pointed out in your opening
Okay,
statement.
you got it. You nailed it. Let's go ahead. That was a perfect question.
Well,
Jennifer
that's
Rubin.
one of the problems with the motion, is that an elite can be anything you say it is this amorphous nothing word that people toss around to explain who other people are that they don't particularly like. But that's a problem for the motion. We're against the motion, so we don't think that blaming amorphous, indescribable segments of society that can mean anything
Okay.
you want them to.
So we have
is
a
really-
problem with the motion, and we have a problem with the moderator. I'm sorry. But I do think your opponents actually came up with a very specific definition of their notion of elites, and I want to know what your response to it is. Can you recite it in one sentence, what you said before in your opening statement, Tim Carney?
The people in power and in elected office who have been in charge of this country for the last couple of decades.
Do you buy that? Does that work for you?
No,
Why not, President Stevens?
not at all. Well, first of all, some of them, I mean, is Obama George W. Bush? We're talking about still a huge collection of people with widely different ideas. And the idea is you just lump them all together as the elite in some kind of weird Marxist way, like this, the upper classes, the bourgeoisie, sticking it to the proletariat. And that's simply not the case. The people to blame for the Trump phenomenon, first and foremost, are the Trump voters who have been bamboozled into a low appeal, not to the better angels of their nature, as Abraham Lincoln said in his first inaugural address, but to their very worst and basest political views and prejudices.
Ben Domenech.
But why were they bamboozled? Why were they vulnerable to that message? The message really does say a lot more than just racism and misogyny. It's rejection of Republican orthodoxy that's been around for a long time when it comes to the economy. It's rejection of Republican foreign policy explicitly over and over and over again. What I keep hearing from Brett and from Jennifer is that nothing really needs to change, that things were actually going pretty much okay, and that Trump just came along and put together this witch's brew of racism and misogyny that was able to somehow, bamboozle all these different people. The reason that they were open to being fooled along these lines is because of real things that were going on in their lives, not just because they wanted more craziness in their media life.
Thank you for that question. So right there. And I do want to emphasize in the last question, like really just getting to the question often, no, but it often turns out to be your best moment, so go for it.
Hello, David Doherty, first-time listener, long-time listener, first-time question asker. So, this question's for both sides. Do you think, insofar there are elites in the media, do you think that some of these media elites, particularly on the left side, have given Trump more of a megaphone and have sort of enjoyed like some sort of self-righteous condemnation of him now for a long time? The Huffington Post, for example, et cetera. Do you think to some degree they're to blame for giving him a megaphone?
And you're taking it out of that Sean Hannity, Rush Limbaugh, actually looking at the left, and you're asking, do the media elites on the left have some responsibility for the Trump phenomenon? I want to take that to Ben Domenech. You want to take it?
Absolutely. The media elites on the left made this possible in part by over-criticizing people who didn't deserve it. Things that were printed about Mitt Romney in 2012 in the New York Times by Paul Krugman called him a charlatan, pathologically dishonest, untrustworthy. He said he didn't even pretend to care about poor people, that he wants people to die so that rich people get richer. He's completely amoral, a dangerous fool, ignorant as well as uncaring.
Sounds familiar.
If you cry wolf long enough, sometimes the beast actually shows up, okay? And when that happened, and when that happened, they no longer had a vocabulary that could be used because everyone tunes them out and says, well, you were saying about this nice Mormon businessman, 4 years ago.
Response from the other side?
Look, I mean, to your question, sure, the media participated to some extent in the rise of this guy, but they weren't pushing him, and they certainly weren't electing him, okay? So you can look at aspects of what you might call elite media, whether it's Joe Scarborough or someone like that, or Mika Brzezinski, find interesting to give this character some airtime thinking he can't possibly go anywhere. But we're talking about what is the phenomenon really all about? So you will find little points in the media where you say, this guy is definitely an elitist and this guy bears some kind of blame for Trump's rise. We're talking about where the weight of the blame truly lies. And again, I insist. And by the way, there's some elite people who support Trump. I don't know, Peter Thiel, I guess you could say, is definitely a member of the elite. But no one seriously thinks
Or possibly